It started like any ordinary morning. I woke before sunrise, pulled on my black GI and stepped out onto my back lawn. The dew still clung to the blades of grass. The air was cool and silent except for the chirping of birds in the distance. I stood in the center of my property surrounded by tall pines and open sky and began the katas that had been passed down to me through generations. My body moved with precision honed through decades of discipline and mastery. Every breath was measured, every movement controlled. To me it was peace. To her it was a threat. Karen lived 3 houses down in a colonial-style home with beige shutters and a flagpole that proudly flew the HOA flag alongside the stars and stripes. She was the self-appointed guardian of the Whispering Elms community, a gated development designed to be a sanctuary of suburban order. She had lived there for 13 years and considered herself the final word on everything from mailbox colors to how many pets a household could own. I had only been there 6 months. From the moment I moved in, she had made it her mission to know everything about me. The dark SUVs that came and went at odd hours, the reinforced steel fence I installed around the property, the fact that I never attended HOA meetings or waved back when she walked her poodle princess in front of my driveway. I was an anomaly, a disruption to the pristine uniformity she worked so hard to maintain. So when she saw me one morning executing a flawless spinning hook kick, she saw danger. Not art, not tradition, not control. She saw a man practicing violence. I didn't know she was watching that day. I didn't see her peering through the hedge, phone in hand, whispering urgently to a 911 dispatcher about a man performing, quote, aggressive combat tactics in broad daylight, end quote. I didn't hear the sirens until they were right behind me. 2 cruisers rolled up onto my lawn, tires grinding the wet grass flat. Officers jumped out, hands near their holsters. I froze mid-stance, surprised but calm. This was not new to me. Overreaction was something I had long since accepted in this line of work. "So keep your hands where we can see them," one of them barked. "You're being detained for public disturbance and possible threat to community safety." I blinked slowly, keeping my arms at my sides. "May I ask under what authority you are detaining me?" "For training on private property," I asked. Karen came scuttling out from behind a tree, phone still clutched in her trembling hand. "That's him, officer," she squeaked. "He was doing those ninja flips and kicking the air and screaming. I'm sure he's some kind of militant. I heard gunshots once. He's unstable. He's going to hurt someone." "There were no gunshots," I said firmly. "And this is not public property. I own this land and I have the right to practice any martial art I wish." The younger of the 2 officers looked at me uncertainly. "Do you have identification, sir?" I did. But instead I reached into the inner pocket of my GI and slowly pulled out a different kind of card. It was matte black with no logo, just a serial number etched into the corner and a seal only a few people in this country would recognize. The older cop took it, examined it, and stiffened. He looked at me again, this time with less suspicion and more discomfort. "We'll need to make a few calls," he muttered, stepping away with a radio. Karen was still going. "He's dangerous. He installed all those security cameras and that weird satellite dish. No one installs a satellite dish unless they're spying. I saw him once talking to a man in a suit with an earpiece. Probably Russian." I turned to her slowly. "I don't work for Russia." "Then who do you work for?" she demanded. "That's classified," I said. "You see," she shrieked at the cops. "He admits it. He's a spy." The younger officer lowered his voice. "Ma'am, I don't think you understand the situation." She threw her hands up. "I don't need to understand anything. I'm the HOA president. This man is breaking the peace. You need to arrest him." The radio on the older cop's shoulder crackled. He listened for a moment, then returned with a changed expression. "You're free to go, sir," he said, returning my card. "Sorry for the disturbance." "That's it," Karen gasped. "That's all? You're just letting him go?" "We've confirmed his credentials, ma'am," the officer said firmly. "He's not a threat." "Not a threat, he's a menace." She was nearly foaming now. The officers exchanged a look. "If you continue making false reports, we may have to take action against you, ma'am." Karen's mouth snapped shut. Her eyes bored into me, full of rage and confusion. I simply bowed slightly and turned back to my house. But that wasn't the end. Later that day I was sipping tea in my study, reviewing documents on a secured laptop, when my phone buzzed. "A secure line." I answered. "Code Indigo," a voice said. "Acknowledged," I replied. "We have a breach of containment on a community surveillance protocol. Local interference reported. You're being activated." I closed the laptop and stood. "Understood. Send location and asset details." As the line went dead, I glanced out the window. Karen was standing across the street, staring at my house, arms folded tightly, her expression a mix of triumph and suspicion. She thought she had won. She thought she had exposed something dark and dangerous. She didn't realize that by making that call she had triggered a protocol that brought every layer of her safe little suburban world under a microscope. She didn't know who I really was. And she certainly didn't know I owned the FBI. The next morning the HOA held an emergency board meeting. Karen presided with smug energy and a self-righteous tone. Residents gathered on foldable chairs in the community center. They listened as she presented her case against me. We must remain vigilant, she said. There are threats among us. People who do not follow the rules. People who operate outside the structure of society. We cannot have a dangerous man living among us practicing combat moves and scaring children. Several residents nodded. Others looked unsure. A few glanced toward my empty chair. I wasn't there. I had more pressing matters. An unmarked black van was parked in my driveway. Inside, agents were reviewing security footage, satellite imagery, and flagged communications. A file was open on the table. Titled Karen Huntington High Priority Community Asset Disruption. A tall agent named Morris leaned over the table. She's made over 30 calls to local law enforcement in the past year, all complaints against neighbors. She's doxed 3 people online. Sent anonymous letters. Filed lawsuits against a couple for planting native wildflowers in their front yard. I nodded. Typical pattern. Narcissistic HOA disorder with delusions of jurisdiction. She's escalating, Morris said. If she senses any pushback, she'll double down. She thinks she's in control. She's not, I said. And that's when the plan began. Karen noticed the new face a few days later. A man named Greg moved into the house on the corner. Tall, calm, friendly. Said he worked in insurance. Always mowing his lawn. Always smiling. Karen liked him. He attended his first HOA meeting with a notebook and a pen and praised Karen's commitment to community order. She didn't know he was FBI. She didn't know every resident around her was being profiled. She didn't know that her phone was tapped, her browser history flagged, and her HOA policies under federal review. Because I had pressed a button. And now the world she controlled was becoming the world we watched. It didn't take long before she noticed things shifting. Her meeting agendas were suddenly challenged. Residents asked about legal overreach. One woman brought up the fact that Karen had increased HOA dues without a formal vote. A man questioned why the community security budget had tripled. Karen fumed. This is an ambush, she snapped. You're all falling for his tricks. That man is a danger. He's manipulating you. Greg leaned forward. I think we're just asking questions. She stood, eyes blazing. You're either with me or against me. Silence. Then Greg smiled. Isn't that what fascists say? Karen's face turned crimson. That night her mailbox was tagged. Not vandalized. A small, unassuming mark etched with a laser visible only under infrared. The FBI had officially moved in. And Karen had officially become a subject of interest. Meanwhile, I continued my morning training. Every kick and strike documented by surveillance drones from above. Every movement part of a wider operation. I wasn't just practicing martial arts. I was establishing pattern behavior. I was showing restraint. Showing discipline. Showing control. Karen grew more agitated. She began posting on community forums about secret government agents and invisible threats. She warned people about facial recognition towers that didn't exist and shadow people living in the woods. She didn't know she was describing us. She didn't know that every word she typed was fed through a linguistic profiler and behavioral algorithm. She didn't know that the FBI had launched Operation Homefront and she was its center. One night she stood outside my property yelling across the street. I know what you are, she shouted. I'm not afraid of you. I stepped out onto the porch, tea in hand. You should be, I said calmly. She stormed off into the darkness. The next day she filed a restraining order. It was denied. And that's when she cracked. She called 911 again. And this time she claimed I had attacked her. That I had broken into her home. That I was running a terrorist training facility from my basement. Police arrived again. This time I was ready. This time I didn't show them a card. I showed them a warrant. And it had her name on it. The knock on Karen's door came just before sunrise. She was already awake, sitting in her kitchen with a half-eaten muffin and a legal pad full of notes about the upcoming HOA meeting. Her poodle Princess barked once and then bolted from the window straight to the door, growling. Karen narrowed her eyes, peered through the peephole, and frowned. She didn't recognize the man. Tall, dressed in a plain navy windbreaker, holding up a badge. Federal Bureau of Investigation, the man said calmly when she opened the door. Karen blinked. You're here about him? No, ma'am, the agent said. We're here about you. For the first time in her life, Karen Huntington was speechless. The agent stepped forward slowly like someone approaching a skittish animal. We'd like to ask you a few questions about your role within the Whispering Elms Homeowners Association. Karen stepped back, letting him in as if in a trance. He was followed by two more agents, each one wearing plain clothes and professional smiles that didn't reach their eyes. They sat in her living room, one agent quietly petting Princess, who immediately abandoned her loyalty for soft fingers and calm energy. Karen crossed her arms tight. What is this about? The lead agent leaned forward. What would you say your responsibilities are as HOA president? Karen straightened. Well, I oversee community regulations, manage disputes, enforce our charter, and maintain a standard of excellence for all homeowners. And how do you enforce those regulations? She faltered momentarily. I issue warnings, I file reports with local law enforcement, I contact residents directly when they violate rules. Have you ever falsified a report? Absolutely not. Ever encouraged other board members to target a resident? Never. Ever used HOA funds for personal gain? Excuse me. The agent opened a folder revealing several printed documents, dated checks, emails, screenshots. Karen's eyes widened slightly as her name appeared repeatedly. We've been reviewing records, he continued, financials, communications, legal documents. There are discrepancies. I don't understand, Karen said. My actions have always been in the best interest of the community. That may be your belief, ma'am, but we have to determine whether any actions crossed legal boundaries. Karen scoffed. Are you seriously investigating me because I reported a dangerous man in our neighborhood? The agent did not smile. He placed a small device on the coffee table and pressed a button. Audio began to play. Karen's voice, angry, shrill, making false claims to dispatchers, accusing me of criminal activity without proof. The agent paused the audio. You claimed he broke into your home. He said you filed a sworn statement. Karen's mouth opened and closed. He's dangerous. He's not who he says he is. I saw people coming and going from his property in black vehicles. The agent nodded. We know you've mentioned that in several calls. Because it's true. He leaned forward. Karen, we know who he is, and more importantly, we know who you are. Karen froze. We're not here to speculate. We're here because your actions have crossed from civic involvement into personal vendetta, and that has consequences. They left without arresting her, but the seed had been planted. Karen watched them drive off, her hands shaking, her chest tight. She stormed into her office and began pulling files, printing emails, gathering anything she thought would clear her name. But she didn't know the FBI already had everything. Across the street, I watched through a window, sipping coffee, my expression unreadable. Agent Morris stood beside me, arms crossed. She's unraveling, he said. I nodded. What's the latest? Her digital profile is flagged under code gray, emotional instability, potential for escalation, high risk for abuse of power. And the board? We've flipped 2 members. They've agreed to testify if it comes to that. Good. Morris glanced at me. You sure you want to go all the way with this? She made it personal, I said. She activated something she didn't understand, and now she's a threat to everyone in this community. And you? I shrugged. I don't take threats lightly. Morris smiled slightly. That's why we brought you in. Later that day, Karen called an emergency board meeting. Only 4 people showed up. 2 of them sat stiffly, avoiding eye contact with her. The other 2 looked openly skeptical. I've just been interrogated by federal agents, she announced, slamming her binder on the table. They are investigating this community. The man next to her, Greg, raised an eyebrow. Investigating the community or investigating you? Karen glared. This is exactly what I warned about. He has connections. He's manipulating everything. Greg leaned back. I think the only manipulation happening is from this board. Excuse me. You've ruled this neighborhood like a little dictator, Karen. Ever since I moved in, you've made it clear that conformity is more important than community. You bullied the Thompsons over their paint color. You fined Mrs. Evans for hanging wind chimes. You tried to ban Halloween decorations. It's about standards, Karen hissed. Without rules there's chaos. No, without compassion there's fear. Karen's voice trembled. I won't be lectured by someone who's been here 3 months. And we won't be governed by someone who thinks power equals purpose. The meeting dissolved into argument. Karen shouting, residents walking out, voices rising. Greg remained calm, standing slowly and facing the room. I motioned to suspend Karen Huntington as acting president, pending investigation. You can't do that, Karen shrieked. But they could, and they did. 3 hands raised, 2 abstained. Greg looked at her quietly. It's done. Karen stood alone in the middle of the room, binder clutched and shaking hands as the others filed out. She began watching my house more frequently, standing behind curtains, taking photos, jotting down notes. She documented everything I did, every delivery, every car, every visitor. I let her. The more paranoid she became, the more evidence she created against herself. She started following me once down a rural highway in her SUV. I led her through backroads to an abandoned storage facility and disappeared through a side entrance. She waited 2 hours. I never came back out. That night, unmarked vans drove through Whispering Elms silently. Agents entered her house while she slept, leaving hidden transmitters behind. They didn't touch anything, didn't take anything, just listened. By the end of the week, the FBI had full access to her digital life emails, texts, browser history, surveillance footage. Her secrets unraveled faster than she could contain them. She had altered HOA election results, falsified complaint records, redirected community funds into a private account. And she had made dozens of anonymous reports to outside agencies using fake names and burner phones. But the worst was yet to come. She filed a lawsuit against me, a civil suit claiming harassment, defamation, and emotional distress. I received the paperwork with mild amusement. My legal team responded within the hour. The countersuit was larger and far more serious. Malicious prosecution. Abuse of authority. Violation of federal privacy laws. It wasn't just a civil case anymore. Now it was federal. Word spread quickly throughout Whispering Elms. The quiet community buzzed with gossip and fear. Some residents sided with Karen, believing her lies. Others distanced themselves, refusing to get involved. But a core group stepped forward with testimonies of their own stories of intimidation, threats, retaliation. The case grew. And so did the pressure. Karen's world began to collapse. She was removed from all HOA duties formally. Her personal bank accounts were frozen, her devices seized, her poodle Princess taken into custody for health checkups after allegations of neglect surfaced. The woman who once controlled every blade of grass in her neighborhood now stood helpless, watching the house she built turn against her. One morning she walked into the community center for what she thought would be a public hearing. Instead, she was met by agents. They read her rights calmly, respectfully. She screamed the whole time. Residents watched from across the lawn silently. I stood beneath a tree watching as the cuffs clicked closed. Karen turned and locked eyes with me one last time. "You did this," she snarled. "No," I said quietly, "you did." They took her away without fanfare. Weeks passed. Peace returned to Whispering Elms. The HOA board was restructured, policies rewritten, surveillance removed, community gardens planted instead of fences. I resumed my morning practice. No sirens this time. No accusations. Just air and breath and movement. One morning as I finished my final kata, a small group of children gathered at the edge of my lawn, watching in silence. I bowed to them. They bowed back. The cycle continued. But the work was not over. Karen was only one. There were more like her. Across the country. In neighborhoods just like this one. Holding power without understanding it. Wielding authority without accountability. And for each of them there was someone like me. Quiet, watching, waiting. Not just protecting the country, but protecting the idea of community itself. I returned to my study, opened a laptop, and entered a secure portal. New files awaited me. New names. New neighborhoods. New missions. Because I didn't just own the FBI. I directed it. And now it was time to clean up the rest. 3 weeks after Karen's arrest, Whispering Elms was quiet for the first time in years. Not the tense silence of controlled order or the fearful hush of a tyrant's gaze, but true calm. The air felt different. The streets didn't carry the usual sense of scrutiny. There were no passive-aggressive flyers taped to mailboxes or anonymous warnings about flower beds or trash bins. People smiled more, waved more. Felt like a real neighborhood. But peace is never permanent, not when darkness hides in routine, not when abuse of power is a habit formed over decades. And not when systems meant to protect are weaponized instead. Karen was gone, but the cracks she left behind still ran deep. And what we found in those cracks was far worse than anything she had done alone. It started with a file. After her arrest, Karen's laptop was confiscated and processed. Dozens of encrypted files were found buried under layers of fake directories and decoy folders. One in particular stood out. It was labeled Project Vigilance. Inside were hundreds of documents outlining surveillance schedules, data logs, complaints, and correspondences, not just from Karen but from multiple HOA presidents across the state. The implications were staggering. She had been part of a private network, a coalition of HOA leaders sharing tactics, enforcement strategies, and even private investigators to monitor homeowners. We realized Karen wasn't a rogue figure. She was part of something bigger. A collective of community tyrants hiding behind the veil of neighborhood safety. And many of them were still active. The investigation widened. I was brought in officially. My role as an embedded director was known only to a handful of federal contacts. To everyone else, I was the quiet man on the corner practicing martial arts and minding his own business. But now I had a different purpose. Now I had targets. Morris brought the new files to my house one evening. He laid them out on the table, each one a neatly compiled profile of a different HOA president from cities and suburbs scattered across the region. "They're calling themselves the Circle," he said. "Coordinated actions across multiple counties. They've buried their tracks well." I scanned the files, noting the patterns. Misuse of power. Suppression of dissent. Manipulation of community rules. retaliatory fines, blackmail. It wasn't just Karen. It was an epidemic. They're careful, Morris added. They don't leave fingerprints. They operate through proxies and closed sessions. Most of them run unopposed every year. No one asks questions because they're afraid to. Not anymore, I said. I selected the first file. A man named Clifford Nash in Northwood Ridge. Let's pay him a visit. Northwood Ridge was a mirror image of Whispering Elms. Gated homes with manicured lawns, private security and community pride signs posted on every block. Nash had ruled the HOA for 8 years. His record was spotless. His reputation impeccable. But under that surface was a trail of silenced complaints and manipulated ballots. We arrived unannounced. Morris posed as a prospective buyer looking to relocate. I came as his brother, a former intelligence officer seeking a quiet place to retire. Nash welcomed us into his office. Tall, lean, with thinning blonde hair and a carefully crafted smile. He was all charm and confidence. We've built something special here, he said proudly, a sanctuary for families who value order and tradition. I nodded, pretending to admire the framed certificates on his wall. You run the HOA personally? Of course, he said. We're a hands-on community. That's the only way to ensure quality. And what happens when someone doesn't follow the rules? He laughed lightly. They learn fast. He offered us coffee. We declined. Morris pressed. We heard you had a contact in Whispering Elms. A woman named Karen. Nash's smile twitched. I might have spoken to her once or twice. What? She was arrested. He paused. Oh, I hadn't heard. That's unfortunate. She was very passionate. Very. I leaned forward. You ever share files with her? He blinked slowly. What kind of files? Surveillance logs. Violation reports. Financial strategies. He stood suddenly. I don't think I like where this conversation is heading. I stood too. That makes 2 of us. I pulled out my card and placed it on his desk. His eyes narrowed. FBI. You can't be serious. I didn't respond. He turned to Morris. This is harassment. I've done nothing wrong. Then you won't mind us looking into your community procedures. We'll be back, I said. And we were. Over the next month, Nash's world began to collapse. Residents started talking. Stories emerged. People who had been fined into silence began coming forward. A woman spoke of being cited for a child's sidewalk chalk art. A man told us he was threatened with eviction for displaying a pride flag. A couple was forced to repaint their house after planting native flowers. We found altered records, forged signatures, tampered voting results. And at the center of it all, Nash. He was removed from office 2 weeks later. Formal charges were filed within the month. 1 down. Dozens to go. The circle was larger than we thought. It had branches across multiple states. Karen was one of the founders. Nash was a financier. Others provided digital infrastructure, surveillance equipment, legal advice. They were running a silent war on individuality, hiding behind bylaws and community covenants. They believed order was more important than freedom. And they were growing. But now we were hunting them. Each new target was more subtle than the last. Gloria Benson in River Pines used noise complaints to push out renters. Dean Patterson in Fairhaven rewrote the bylaws to prevent certain ethnic families from moving in. Rachel Stone in Highland Crest had installed unauthorized facial recognition systems. And each time we arrived, they underestimated us. Each time we found the truth. Each time we shut them down. The media caught wind of the operation but didn't know the full extent. They reported a wave of resignations and arrests across HOAs in the Southwest. They called it the suburb purge. Talk shows debated it. Some called it justice. Others feared government overreach. But the people who lived in those communities knew. They saw the change. They felt the weight lift. They started to breathe again. Meanwhile, Karen awaited trial. She refused plea deals. She demanded press. She claimed she was the victim of a federal conspiracy. Her lawyers tried to suppress evidence, but the paper trail was undeniable. Dozens of victims testified. Her own board members turned on her. Even her poodle was adopted by a new family. In the end, she was convicted on 6 counts of fraud, 3 of harassment and 2 of obstruction. She would spend the next 15 years in a federal facility. I didn't attend the sentencing. I was already working the next case. Because the fight wasn't over. Because for every Karen there were 10 more waiting in the shadows. And because I had seen what happened when good people stayed silent too long. Whispering Elms held its first free election in years that spring. Turnout was record-breaking. New leadership was voted in. Community bylaws were rewritten. Fines were reduced. Gardens flourished. So did friendships. And I kept training each morning not just for discipline but for balance. Sometimes a man must be calm. Sometimes a man must strike. One morning a new neighbor approached me as I practiced. Her name was Amanda, a single mother with 2 boys and a rescue dog. She watched quietly, then asked, "Are you the one who got rid of Karen?" I paused, considering. "I helped." She nodded, "Thank you," and walked away. Simple words, but they mattered. The FBI asked if I wanted to move to a new location, a new cover, a new mission. I declined. I liked it here. For once I felt like a part of something that didn't need controlling. It just needed protecting. And I could do that without force, with presence, with purpose. But in the back of my mind I knew the circle wasn't gone. Some of them had gone underground. Others changed names, moved cities, shifted tactics. And sooner or later they'd try again. Power never gives up easily, especially when it wears the face of good intentions. So I stayed ready. I kept training. I kept watching. And I kept listening. Because someone had to. Because when HOA Karens rise again, they won't expect the quiet neighbor in the GI. They won't expect the man mowing his lawn to be recording everything. And they definitely won't expect the one they tried to silence to be the one who owns the FBI. Spring turned to summer in whispering elms, and with each passing day the memory of Karen's regime faded like old paint on forgotten fences. The neighborhood breathed easier now. Lawns once mowed in fear were now wild with confidence, blooming with colors the old HOA would have fined into extinction. Children played freely, chalk drawings stretching across sidewalks, dogs ran unleashed through yards, music drifted from open windows, and no one reported a single thing. But I remained vigilant. Because justice has layers and silence is often temporary. And because I had just received a file that changed everything. Morris met me at the usual place, a quiet bench by the old park fountain where squirrels outnumbered people and the only cameras were ours. He handed me a plain folder with no markings and said one word: "Phoenix." I opened the file and scanned the first few pages. The circle wasn't dead. It had evolved. After the arrests and resignations, after the indictments and public exposure, what was left of the HOA cabal had regrouped, rebranded, and restructured. They were no longer calling themselves the Circle. Now they were Phoenix. A coalition of former HOA leaders, ex-security consultants, rogue attorneys, and disbarred land developers. Their new mission was deeper than control. It was retaliation. They believed their downfall was orchestrated by a single entity. They believed I had exposed them. And they were right. Now they wanted to return the favor. The file listed 5 names. Each one was flagged as high influence. These weren't just petty tyrants. These were people with access. Property rights enforcement officers, judges, real estate syndicate heads, and one retired congressman. They were connected, resourced, and angry. They had already begun infiltrating new communities, planting agents in local boards, posing as helpful volunteers while slowly shifting rules behind the scenes. They weren't trying to dominate neighborhoods anymore. They were trying to turn them into private kingdoms immune to oversight. It had happened before. It would not happen again. I stood from the bench and looked Morris in the eye. "Tell the director I'm going active." Morris nodded and vanished into the city. The hunt was on again. The first name was Evelyn Sharp. She had once chaired the Eastbrook HOA in Nevada. After being ousted during the original purge, she relocated to a small but wealthy gated community outside Prescott. Within months she was on the board. Within a year she was president. Within 18 months she had rewritten the community charter to include a clause that granted her sole authority during times of, quote, regulatory uncertainty. No one knew what that meant. Until she began using it to seize homes. Her strategy was simple. She would claim a property was in violation of undefined maintenance standards, initiate foreclosure proceedings using predatory legal language, then quietly purchase the home through a shell company. Over 2 years she took 7 houses this way. I flew in undercover as a landscape consultant named Leon. My cover file said I worked in high-end botanical design and HOA compliance. She met me in her office on a breezy afternoon. She was as sharp as her name suggested. 55, icy confident, dressed in white with a gold pin on her collar that glinted whenever she turned her head. "You come, highly recommended," she said, pouring herself iced tea. Her eyes never left mine. I nodded. "My work speaks for itself." She smiled thinly. "That's what I like. Quiet professionals." We talked for an hour about plant types, drainage systems, and erosion control. She was trying to build a case against a family with too many rose bushes on their front porch. I agreed to help document the violations. That night I broke into her private archive. Using a bypass code obtained through a covert signal transmitter, I entered her file room and found exactly what I expected. Fake signatures, altered photographs, pre-written complaint forms dated months in advance. She wasn't just bending the rules. She was writing her own. I sent the evidence to the bureau by morning. 3 days later, Evelyn Sharp was arrested during a board meeting after trying to fine a veteran for installing a flagpole. Her reaction was violent. She screamed about the deep state, the false laws, the New World Order. They cuffed her quietly. 1 down, 4 to go. The next name was Byron Kessler. He had been disbarred in 2013 for evidence tampering. Since then he had created a consulting firm that offered, quote, HOA optimization services to boards across the country. What he actually did was teach boards how to suppress dissent. I posed as a desperate HOA member from Illinois seeking help to remove a rebellious resident. He invited me to his private estate for a consultation. The place was massive. Marble floors, gold accents, surveillance in every hallway. We sat in a soundproof room while he laid out his strategy. You start by redefining community terms, he said. Most people don't read the charters. They'll accept almost anything as long as it sounds like order. Then what I asked? Create fear. Not overt. Subtle. A few warnings. A few fines. Target the loudest critics. Make examples. And if they resist, litigate them into silence. They can't afford the fight. Most people fold when they see the first court letter. I recorded every word. That night I uploaded the files to a secure server. Byron was taken into custody within 48 hours. He tried to sue. He lost. 2 down, 3 to go. The third was harder. Her name was Cassandra Doyle and she had never been on an HOA board. Instead she built the systems they used. She was the lead architect behind a surveillance software called Sentinel Watch, a system marketed to gated communities that offered predictive behavior analysis and real-time movement tracking. What the brochures didn't say was that Sentinel Watch also included illegal facial recognition and resident profiling based on social media activity. She lived in a smart house in Oregon, completely automated, voice-controlled and heavily monitored. I approached her as a privacy consultant. We met in a soundproof room where every conversation was logged and every word stored in a cloud she believed was secure. Wasn't. I watched her demonstrate how she flagged residents for patterns she didn't like. They post about politics too much, she said. The system marks them. What happens next? We notify the board. Encourage preemptive outreach. Sometimes suggest warnings. You scare them. We maintain stability. And who decides what stability looks like? She smiled. That's the beauty. The board defines it. We just enforce. I sent the entire demonstration to our cyber division. They traced her network to 16 other communities using her illegal algorithms. She was arrested mid-pitch at a technology expo in San Francisco. 3 down. The fourth was someone I had known before. Judge Martin Rowe. He had presided over a dozen HOA-related lawsuits during the original purge. What no one knew then was that he was quietly helping the circle behind closed doors. Now retired, he was consulting on legal structure for Phoenix, drafting documents designed to make HOA rulings nearly immune to outside appeal. I met him at a golf course in Arizona. We shook hands like old friends. He didn't recognize me. I asked him about his new work. He bragged openly. We're building untouchable communities, he said, places where the law stops at the gate. And what happens when that power is abused? He laughed. Power is always abused. The trick is making sure the right people are doing it. He was arrested on conspiracy charges the following week. 4 down. 1 name left. And it was the worst one of all. Gerald Markson. Former congressman, former lobbyist, former architect of the HOA Lobby Reform Act that had allowed community boards to bypass certain federal restrictions. He was the seed from which the circle had grown. Now he was rebuilding Phoenix in secret using offshore funds and private contractors. His plan was more ambitious than Karen's, more dangerous than Nash's, and more strategic than Cassandra's. He wanted to privatize entire suburban zones, turning neighborhoods into micro-governments free from federal oversight. He had already purchased land in 3 states. He had partners in major banks and retired military officers. And he had just hosted a private summit for community leaders in an undisclosed location. I was invited under the name Julian Ward, a real estate speculator with a background in security and urban development. The summit was held in a secure compound in Montana. Only 20 guests. Every one of them dangerous. I listened to Gerald speak for 2 hours. He spoke of freedom, autonomy, independence. He spoke of self-regulation, of defense systems, of shared belief. He spoke of removing weak links and eliminating non-compliant members. He was building a nation. Inside a nation. When the summit ended, I approached him directly. He greeted me with the smile of a man who thought he was already a king. Mr. Ward, he said, we could use someone like you. I smiled back. I'm already here. That night I activated the final phase. Satellite data, drones, heat maps, facial analysis, biometric tags. Within 24 hours the compound was surrounded. By the next morning it was over. Gerald was taken into custody along with 15 others. Phoenix was dead. For now. I returned to Whispering Elms exhausted but proud. The threat had been buried again. But I knew better than to celebrate. I resumed my training. Every morning. Under the same sky. With the same breath. Because someone must always remain. In the shadows. Waiting. Watching. Preparing. Because HOA Karens may rise again. But so will I. And I don't just own the FBI. I protect its soul. It had been 6 months since the fall of Phoenix. 6 months since the last summit was raided and the final names were arrested. Gerald Markson now faced a trial that would last for years. His empire had crumbled before it even truly began. The other leaders were spread across federal detention facilities facing stacked charges and closed courtrooms. But despite their fall, I knew better than to believe it was over. Systems this deep never die easy. Ideas linger long after power is stripped. And men who dream of control rarely accept defeat. I had seen it in Karen's eyes when she was led away in cuffs. I had seen it in Gerald's face when he realized who I was. They all believed the same thing. That power was theirs by right. That communities existed to be shaped by their vision and enforced by their standards. But the truth is, power belongs to the people who protect it, not the ones who hoard it. I learned that as a child. And I never forgot. It was early autumn in Whispering Elms. The trees had begun to change their colors, soft oranges and faded yellows painting the sidewalks like strokes on a canvas. Children wore light jackets and raced each other through the leaves. Parents smiled on porches. No one watched over them anymore. They simply lived. And I remained as I had always been. The quiet man who trained at dawn. The one they waved to but didn't question. But something in the air had shifted. Not fear. Not danger. Something heavier. It started with a letter. No return address. No postage stamp. Just left on my doorstep. The paper was textured heavy like a business card but larger. The writing was precise, dark ink printed, not handwritten. The message was short. We know what you did. We're still here. It was unsigned. I stared at the letter for a long time. Then I burned it. And I waited. The second letter came a week later. This one had a map. A location circled in red. A small town in the hills of North Carolina. Nothing else. I traced the location. A new residential development called Haven Ridge. It didn't exist on any public zoning maps. No records. No permits. No advertisements. But satellite imagery showed homes. 12 to be exact. Perfectly arranged in a grid. Fences 10 feet high. No cars. No people. No movement. It was too quiet. Too clean. Too deliberate. I packed my bag and left at sunrise. No announcement. No goodbye. Just the way I liked it. Morris met me on the way. He had been watching the same development from afar. It's a ghost town, he said. Too perfect. Too symmetrical. We think it's a shell. A test site. What kind of test, I asked. Social control. Surveillance tech. Community behavior manipulation. We think Phoenix was trying something new before they fell. A new type of neighborhood. Where people don't just follow rules. They become the rules. We arrived at Haven Ridge just after dusk. The town was tucked between pine trees and narrow roads. There was no sign. No welcome gate. No guard. Just pavement leading into uniform silence. We parked outside and approached on foot. The homes were identical. White siding, black roofs, square lawns trimmed with surgical precision. Every window was dark. Every door locked. But something felt off. There were no bugs. No birds. No wind. It was like the whole place was sealed in glass. Morris ran a scan. There's a jamming field here, he said. Signal suppression. That's military grade. We kept moving. The houses were staged inside like model homes. Furniture pristine. Appliances unused. No dust. No scent. No signs of life. I checked the closets. Empty. Checked the drawers. Empty. Then I found the basement door. It was hidden behind a false wall in the master bedroom. We pried it open and descended into darkness. What we found was not a basement. It was a control room. Screens lined the walls showing camera feeds from every house in the town. But the cameras weren't watching the homes. They were watching the streets outside. They were watching neighborhoods across the country. Footage of real families. Real people. Tagged with names and codes. Dozens of monitors. Dozens of lives under watch. Morris stared at the screens. They were using Haven Ridge as a hub. Feeding data from Phoenix loyalists still embedded elsewhere. This wasn't over. It was growing again. And the ones behind it were smarter than before. We copied everything we could. Then we left. By dawn, Haven Ridge was surrounded by black vans. Agents moved in silently. They found servers, encrypted hard drives, blueprints, plans, and a message written on the wall of the main control room. It simply read, "Reset begins now." We took that as a declaration. They weren't trying to reclaim power anymore. They were trying to rewrite the foundation, to build communities from the ground up where choice didn't exist, only obedience. They were trying to erase the soul of freedom one neighborhood at a time. And we had just stopped the first attempt. But it wouldn't be the last. We returned to Whispering Elms in silence. And I resumed my practice. The next morning as I moved through my katas, a woman approached me. She was new. Moved in last week. She watched for a moment, then said, "Are you the one they whisper about?" I kept my stance. What do they whisper? That you stopped something dark. That you helped this place breathe again. I finished my form and turned toward her. "What's your name?" "Julia." She extended a hand. I shook it once and said nothing. She smiled. "You ever think about teaching?" "Teaching what?" "Whatever it is you do at dawn." I considered the idea. "Perhaps." She nodded and walked away. Later that week, 3 more people joined me on the lawn. They watched, listened, tried to follow. It was clumsy at first, but honest. No uniforms, no commands, just shared movement and breath. And something else. Trust. Something the HOAs of the past never understood. You cannot build peace through fear. You cannot enforce community. You can only create space for it to grow. And protect it when necessary. That was my role. That would always be my role. Not to lead. Not to command. But to stand ready. When the next Karen rises. When the next Gerald speaks. When the next attempt is made to control lives behind the mask of order. I'll be there. Not in shadow. Not in silence. But standing barefoot on the grass. Balanced. Still. Aware. Because I don't just own the FBI. I am the safeguard it left behind. A guardian. A witness. A quiet storm. And if they ever try to rebuild what we destroyed, if they ever try to rise again, they'll find me waiting. And I will not fall. If you enjoyed the story, make sure to hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe. More unbelievable stories are coming soon.